There's a competition. I'm going to spend just a few minutes introducing the judges, and then we'll ask the team to introduce themselves. And then I have a short guidelines to read, and then we'll begin. So my name is Bill Murin. I'm a retired healthcare executive. I currently serve on a couple of boards and do some community work. And this is my fourth year doing judging in the competition. So Bob, would you like to?
I'm Bob Stone. I've judged several competitions in the past. I'm not sure how many. I missed a couple years because of the pandemic. I'm a retired federal executive, spent 30 years at the Pentagon and the White House. And after I retired from the federal government, I spent several years teaching business ethics at the University of Redlands Extension. Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Can we have the team introduce yourselves? Just go right down whatever order you'd like.
Sure. So my name is Sophie Bukrinsky. I am an MBA student and I study business analytics.
Welcome. Next.
Oh,
Go ahead, Rachel.
Are you sure? Sorry, I am Rachel Resnov. I'm a master's student. I'm getting my master's in international business.
Welcome.
My name is Pilar Reyes. I'm a senior in the undergraduate college. I'm studying business analytics.
Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Paul Cornelius. I'm a senior in undergraduate, majoring in international business.
Welcome. Nice to have you here. I'm going to read the instructions that we provided each of the teams as we begin the competition. In this part of the competition, you are taking a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. And in this case, as we read your summary, we are the board of directors for Hugo Boss. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who we are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask questions for about 10 to 15 minutes, given the time that we have. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will remain in character. So the judges will continue to act as a board of directors would to react to your presentation. After the Q&A, we will give you feedback outside of our role playing. So we'll stop and we'll not be judges any longer, just give you some feedback and also provide you the opportunity to ask us some questions. So you'll have 25 minutes in the first part of the session today. I will give you a 2-minute warning if you need it by putting my hand up like that and letting you know that we have 2 minutes remaining. All right, are we about ready? I will start the timer when you begin talking. You may begin.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, Pilar, I'm sorry, Rachel, do you want to start us off?
Yep. So, hello everyone, and thank you so much for having us here today. We are Avant Garde Consulting, and we are here to talk to you about how you can become the leader in setting ethical standards in the high-end fashion industry. My name is Rachel, and I'm one of the consultants here, and my colleagues are Sophie, Paul, and Pilar. Pilar will start off our presentation.
Good day, Board of Directors. So I don't know about you, but when I go shopping, I'm so excited to find new pieces that make me feel good. However, that excitement is not shared by the other side of the fabric. Imagine you were a young female Indian textile worker that sews garments for Hugo Boss. You've taken residence at the factory dormitories as you were promised protection against unsafe local conditions. However, in the dorms, you're restricted from leaving the premises whenever you like or without a chaperone, even on your days off from the factory. Your cell phone has either been confiscated or at least tapped so that the wardens can monitor your conversations. A male employee describes the restrictions he witnesses upon women like you. He says, "I work next to these girls daily. We are not allowed to talk with them at all, neither during work or on breaks. Off work, they almost never come out of the hostel, only together with guards or parents." Now, take a minute to reflect on how these suppliers have been treated. Are you excited to buy garments from Hugo Boss?
Thank you, Pilar. The reason why we're here today is to answer the question, how can Hugo Boss meet growing consumer demand for social sustainability initiatives within the high fashion industry? We've identified the following two large issues. First, health and safety and human rights issues with suppliers, as well as a lack of transparency for the consumer. We have come up with the following solutions with tangible action plans to combat these problems. We have come up with a three-prong approach, including evaluate supplier relationships and standards, enact labor rights support programs, and elevate transparency between Hugo Boss and its stakeholders. We will also evaluate the financial, ethical, and legal impact of the current situation. Currently, you have made significant progress in setting up ethical policies, and we want to acknowledge that and let you know that we have done the research and we can see where Hugo Boss is headed. You have identified the potential risks in your supply chain through a materiality risk assessment. You have issued a code of conduct to suppliers. You have made partnerships in auditing with the Fair Labor Association, Partnerships for Sustainable Textiles, joined the Tamil Nadu Initiative, the Living Wage Lab, and the International Accord for Health and Safety in the textile and garment industry. Surely these partnerships aid in the verification and audit process within your supply chain. You have also implemented a transparent complaint system called Ombudsman, which all workers and suppliers have access to. And you've modified your supplier selection process to include questionnaires and interviews. We want to acknowledge the start of this important journey. We want to help you realize your social sustainability goals by bridging the gap between consumer demand and your actions. Through your materiality risk assessment, you acknowledge that human rights and labor issues are important to stakeholders and consumers, and yet the impact of your company is quite low. Studies have shown that far more brands have set environmental goals rather than labor rights commitments, even as consumers increasingly demand it. We believe that you have a great opportunity to set the bar in the high fashion industry by meeting these consumer expectations and demand, and it would, in effect, expand your market share. I'm going to pass it to Pilar now.
Thank you, Sophie. Despite your progress to launch ethical policies, labor violations remain rampant in 3 countries, China, Turkey, and India. Forced labor has been reported in cotton mills in India, as well as factories in the Xinjiang province in China, where the Uyghur Muslim population endures ethnic cleansing. In December of 2021, President Biden banned imports from this region due to human rights concerns. In addition, union and gender-based discrimination has been reported in Turkey. Union members have been dismissed for their membership, or workers have been forced to resign from unions to remain employed by a factory. In addition, women who are pregnant have been dismissed, or women have seen non-pregnancy clauses in their contracts. Finally, poor working conditions also remain. For example, in a factory in Izmir, Turkey, the temperature has been reported at 104 degrees with no attempt to make it more comfortable for the workers. Your responses to the global violations have been tepid and vague. This has invited more questions that undermine your efforts of rectification. For instance, responding to forced labor in China, your company issued a zero tolerance policy for forced labor, but it's unclear how compliance with this policy is measured. In addition, in response to union discrimination in Turkey, your company claimed a de minimis partnership status with the factory to absolve itself of the responsibility. However, this raises the question, does Hugo Boss think that a de minimis status means that violations are permitted or condoned? Furthermore, how would Hugo Boss respond if they are not a de minimis partner? Finally, in your 2016 sustainability report, your company committed itself to an investigation of forced labor in India. However, the 2020 sustainability report made no mention of the investigation. What did the investigation reveal? What changes were implemented based on the investigation's findings? All these questions have been unanswered. The violations across these 3 countries make your corporation non-compliant with the UN's 8th Sustainable Development Goal, which is to promote decent work and economic growth for all. More specifically, 2 target goals have been breached. Target 8.7 calls for the eradication of forced labor, but of course, the acts in India and China breach this. Second, Target 8.8 promotes labor rights and safe working conditions, but the discrimination and unsafe factory temperatures breach this target.
So against our original executive summary, we changed the recommendations from a more ambiguous set of suggestions to actionable plans Hugo Boss can implement across their supply chain to address the violations that Pilar just illustrated. Endowed with bearing responsibility for improving working conditions, we need to guarantee and nurture the space within which HB operates and bear the costs of improvement. In meeting the current and future sustainability issues facing the company and industry, Hugo Boss needs a 3-pronged approach: evaluate, enact, and elevate. By effectively executing the 3 E's, Hugo Boss will adopt labor-related social responsibility issues and improve their SDG 8 progress, which will in turn safeguard the company's reputation and viability moving forward.
We will now move on to the actionable solutions. Our first solution under the evaluate recommendation is establishing a new C-suite position for a chief supply chain officer. We believe that this would be influential in handling labor and sustainability issues in a more holistic manner, as the responsibility of sourcing, production, supply chain operations, and labor relations, as well as HR, are collectively overseen by the CFO and COO. Research has shown that there is a growing employment market for specialized skills that pertain to decision-making within this space, and that the scope of work that is involved in making decisions regarding supply chain management and sustainability is far too complex to be grouped with other responsibilities the CFO and COO may have. By creating a new C-suite position dedicated to these decisions and issues, you can guarantee real change and dedication, as well as working across the board of directors. Our second solution under the evaluate recommendation is establishing stringent and rigid supplier standards that are upheld by a contractual relationship with the supplier. We suggest you impose this by researching the most rigid regulations that exist across all of your suppliers and imposing those standards on all suppliers, rather than modifying standards based on country regulations. By doing this, suppliers are ahead of the curve and have a first mover advantage in terms of fostering innovation. You and your suppliers will already have norms in place that are still emerging, and you will be 2 cycles ahead of other businesses and have more time to experiment with technologies and processes. Our first solution under our ENACT recommendation is to increase the price paid to suppliers by 10% by increasing the price point of retail garments by 1%. We recommend also a prepay system for suppliers, where instead of paying for production orders after the fact, we believe it would empower workers more to implement a 50% prepay system when the order is placed, and then the other 50% will be paid once the work order is complete. We have come up with this solution because research shows that workers feel more empowered by pay raises and living wage rather than just training and literacy programs, which is what Hugo Boss is implementing at the moment. Our next solution under our ENACT recommendation is to invest in making realistic production timelines for suppliers. This can fall under the new C-suite position of Chief Supply Chain Officer. Research has shown that suppliers feel pressure and put pressure on workers to accomplish tight deadlines. If there is a realistic production timeline in place that is routine for suppliers, they will not uphold their workers to such rigid standards and schedules. Our next solution is for the Elevate Transparency recommendation. We recommend implementing an impact-weighted accounting system that will be released along with your regular financial statements. We recommend this because research is showing that this is becoming more popular and that investors and stakeholders are showing more interest in these metrics. Impact-weighted accounting will accurately quantify your impact on your labor and also establish a triple bottom line, which is important for investors. Current CSR reports do not accurately quantify your full labor impact, and partnering with firms such as the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board and Global Reporting Initiative will help in creating a quantifiable impact that Hugo Boss is achieving with these other recommendations. Our last recommendation for our Elevate Transparency solution is to implement a blockchain technology called Retraced. With Retraced, information is collected on materials, environmental impacts, and labor conditions with each garment. This blockchain technology is also interactive with consumers, and it's easy to access through QR codes. I'll now pass it to Rachel to talk about the ethical impact.
It is important to acknowledge the ethical issues within your value chain for you to become the leader. Currently, 1.8 million people are in detention camps around the globe, and unfortunately, this includes some of your employees in the value chain. The result of that is 20% of cotton is being made with forced labor. As you mentioned in your 10K from last year, China and Turkey are very important sourcing markets for your cotton. As Pilar indicated earlier, there are a lot of human rights violations going on within these countries. This is a clear violation of human rights laws and SDG 8. In addition to unfair working environments, these partners within the value chain contribute to 2.1 billion greenhouse gas emissions. Out of the 76 suppliers you audited last year, more than 40 of them received a rating of improvements needed or below for environmental compliance performance. On the next slide, I highlight that you have a moral obligation to evaluate the health and safety of your workers within your value chain. As I mentioned earlier, 17% of your cotton comes from a region in China. This region in China is tied to human rights violations. It is also your responsibility to evaluate these partners who have these claims to ensure your workers are being treated fairly. Transparency and accountability are key to become the ethical leader within your industry. With that being said, you need to sit back and rethink how comfortable you are with contributing to these violations. On the next slide, I talk about the financial impact of our recommendations. Our research has found that 66% of consumers value more transparency and sustainability efforts within clothing companies. With our recommendations, we are making the assumption that your company will grab 25% of this market. To show this, we recalculated the 2021 EBIT and took out the costs associated with our recommendations. For Evaluate, we found that the average business contract costs about $86. With your 156 suppliers, implementing new contracts will cost about $128,000. For the new C-suite position, their salary, including benefits, will be $195,000 for a total of $323,642,000. For Enact, we made these assumptions based off of your financial statements for inventory last year. I've added in the 10% to account for the increased price paid to suppliers for raw and semi-finished goods. And for our last recommendation, Evaluate, we made the assumption that the sustainable accounting standards will cost about $20,000 and the blockchain app development will cost about $250,000 for a total of $270,000. With these new recommendations, we've calculated a new EBIT of $704,870,760. Next, Pilar will talk about the legal implications.
Thank you, Rachel. The violations that have occurred within your supply chain are crimes. Implementing our solution will ensure compliance with the global fair labor laws and standards. This January, the German Supply Act will go into effect, which will set standards for companies like Hugo Boss, who have international supply chains in developing countries. As Hugo Boss is a German company, you are subject to the anti-discrimination and anti-slavery initiatives required by the new act. The sooner your company adopts our recommendations, you will meet compliance with minimal financial and logistical costs. In addition, implementing our strategies will reverse your company's breach of union discrimination laws in Turkey and forced labor laws in India. It is highly advisable that Hugo Boss terminates criminal activity immediately. Finally, the Fair Labor Association outlines benchmarks for ethical employment relationships. Though not law, these benchmarks are revered as ethical labor standards. As a partner of the FLA, your company's practices defy 3 freedom of association benchmarks. Number 2, the right to freely associate. Number 4, prohibition of anti-union harassment. And number 5, prohibition of anti-union dismissals. Hugo Boss's felonies will impede business viability in the legal and public arenas if your company does not purify its supply chain. Undertaking the recommendations we have advised will propel your company to the height of compliance and become a leader in the luxury retail market.
What's really important going forward is that you take preventive action rather than reacting to lapses in your value chain. With major allegations regarding unsafe working conditions at supplier factories, this poorly reflects on your corporate image and lack of transparency. So, as to properly enforce code of conduct, you need to take preemptive action and do what's right on behalf of your workers. Since you're an industry leader, Hugo Boss needs to strategically prioritize corporate social responsibility and improving the conditions for the manufacturing workers. By targeting SDG 8 as an improvement area and acting on sustainability, Hugo Boss can better tackle the problems before they arise and ameliorate what it means to work for such a great company. If you act on our recommendations now, a year from now, we can become the company in which workers can feel more empowered and are happier in their workplace. You will be able to take advantage of a better brand reputation with heightened profits from luxury good consumers concerned about ethical consumption. And you'll be able to be seen again as a company that promotes fair work worldwide. Thank you, and now we're ready for your questions.
Thank you very much. As a senior judge, I'll start out with some questions and then we'll rotate it back and forth. The first question is, who engaged you? Did we as a board or did the management team engage you? Who engaged you?
We understood it as the board of directors called our firm in as a consulting team in order to bring them along in their current progress. So they have made some changes, but they want to kind of meet the goals that they have set or that you have set, and we were brought in order to meet those goals.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. The one question I have is on one of your slides going back on the enact portion of this. You mentioned that we have a moral obligation. Can you describe how we have a moral obligation to look at our suppliers and your practices? Why do we have a moral obligation? Where does that come from?
So you guys have a moral obligation because even though these are third-party suppliers, they are still working for you, helping you guys produce your products and your clothing. And with that being said, just making sure that those workers within those suppliers are being treated fairly, are having bathroom breaks, are giving clean water, fair temperature, like treating those suppliers is just as important as treating your own employees within your stores and at your corporate headquarters.
So if I can understand that, you believe that we should ensure that our suppliers treat their employees the same as we treat our employees?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
A couple of questions. This idea of a chief supply chain officer is intriguing. Is that a common practice in the fashion industry or in any industry?
So we have seen that this is becoming a trend, and I'm just pulling up my research here now. But since the pandemic, the biggest sectors that have risen in terms of C-suite opportunities were chief supply chain officers and chief diversity officers. So this is kind of something that's like a growing trend and becoming a new wave. And it's something I actually, just full disclosure, haven't really done the research on other fashion companies and whether they are implementing this, but I can tell you that my research shows that this is something that is trending and becoming more important to people. And this is something that is kind of becoming a whole position where people can kind of focus and make decisions regarding these complex issues.
It really sounds like a powerful change in the direction that you're headed. How did you decide on a cost, on a salary for this guy? It seems like you're not not suggesting we pay him very much.
So Thank you for that question. So I actually looked up what the average salary is in a fashion powerhouse, like what the C-suite executives are paid on average. Now, I'm not sure how accurate this metric I pulled is, but I saw that they are paid $150,000 or less, with a 3% increase, just to incorporate like any benefits such as health insurance or 401k. We kind of came up with that $195,000 metric, but $150,000 salary is what I found to be on the max end, and even that I thought seemed a little low, but that's what I pulled offline. So that was the assumption I made.
Okay, well, I guess I like the idea of that, of establishing that position. The other thing you said that struck me as groundbreaking is to prepay the suppliers. Does anybody in the world do that?
So I think, based on my research, looking at supply chain trends and what other companies are doing, a lot of times the reason why suppliers are, put so much pressure on workers and they don't have money to invest is because they receive pay, or they receive money from the work orders, like sometimes months after the production order is complete and shipped out. So I am not sure how novel this idea is. However, I can tell you through my research, it looks like a lot of companies pay their suppliers months after the shipment is completed.
Okay, one last question. I think if we carry out your recommendations, we'll wind up losing a lot of contractors in Western China. And the question is, are we doing any favor for the workers there now by putting this kind of pressure on the employers? It seems to me that we have to worry about, or think about, are they going to go from having tough, inhuman working conditions to starving for lack of work? What's the effect on the workers if we impose these conditions on the employers?
So I think are you referencing this slide, or are you referencing?
Well, you talked about in all three countries, pretty awful working conditions. And it seems to me that if we tell the employer, the contractor in Western China, you have to allow unions and you have to allow the workers more freedom, the contractors are likely to say, well, we can't do that and survive, so we'll go looking for business from Nike or somebody else, or we'll just close down our plant. Don't you have to
Clark,
think?
please go ahead.
Don't you have to think about a supply and demand thing here? If we raise the price of labor, we're going to reduce the number of workers.
Bob, that is an excellent concern. And that's not something that I thought about when I was coming up with this analysis. You're definitely right that the loss of these workers, if the factories choose not to comply with us, that will have a major effect on our ability to deliver a product. And we will certainly need to do more research on this question. However, right now, I can tell you that it is of the utmost importance to Hugo Boss that their supply chain is free from these violations. And it would be most ideal if we could find some way to ensure that these workers are being reassigned or finding new work that is properly appreciating those workers. But definitely the #1 concern and priority is to free Hugo Boss supply chains of crimes and violations.
Thank you.
I had just a couple of other questions. When you talked about the increase to suppliers by 10%, where did that number come from? How did you determine 10%? And then how does that translate to some action on their part?
Sure. So when I was conducting my research to come up with solutions, I saw that there was a lot of onus placed on the suppliers to pay their workers more. However, none of the companies that were kind of using these suppliers were taking ownership or, treating the suppliers as a business partner and investing their own money into helping the suppliers pay the workers more. At the end of the day, they didn't want it to come out of their pocket. So I just used an assumption that if we paid our suppliers 10% more, that they could, one, invest in the business, in technologies that they are using within their factories, to make conditions less severe for the workers, as well as increase pay for the workers. That way, Hugo Boss takes some ownership over their suppliers, as well as treats them like a business partner and invests in the suppliers as well. To be clear, I completely used an assumption that 10% would be sufficient in not only investing in the production, but also, increasing the pay for the garment workers. But I did use research to come up with subsidizing this by increasing retail by 1%.
Okay. You've presented to us, a very compelling set of recommendations based on some facts that have come to light to us. But in all of this, there's all this upside. What should we know about any downside as a board, as it may impact the company? What is the downside? Is there any downside?
So I think one of the biggest concerns or risks could be that consumers don't bite. That could be one of the biggest risks that I could see here, is that consumers don't respond to all these actions, or they don't bite, or you don't increase the market share as you had hoped to do. Mainly, this really appeals to the Gen Z market share as well as the millennial market share. They are very concerned about these issues. And that is the one risk that I really see, is that they don't really respond to these changes. However, we suggest mitigating that by working in your current marketing budget and actions, kind of working in the transparency into the current marketing that is in place. So not increasing your marketing budget, but just rearranging it to include this transparency and accountability, as well as kind of advertising these changes however you might see fit.
Yes, and in addition, in the event that our target consumers have low appreciation for our plans, at least upon successful implementation, Hugo Boss will no longer be violating national laws in Turkey, India, China, and Germany. As I mentioned before, in January of 2023, Germany will begin the new act that requires companies with international supply chains in developing countries to rid of human rights violations. The sooner that your company implements our changes, many costs related to a late implementation will be avoided.
Is there any risk to the board that in your executive summary and some of the other points you're making that some of these issues have been brought to the attention of our organization and they haven't been acted on? So is there a risk to the board in pursuing this when we may not have alignment within the organization?
So I'm sorry, does someone else want to take this? Paul, maybe? Okay, so I do think I don't think there's any misalignment here. I think Hugo Boss has, they've issued many code of conduct statements as well as anti-slavery statements. They've issued a lot of great statements that kind of, address these issues and take accountability. And they've, you've started making changes, but we just want to help get you there, because realistically, the goals are for 2025 and the policies in place now are a great start, but we want to kind of close the gap and kind of make it, kind of bridge it so that you can meet those goals maybe even sooner than you had hoped. And while the policies in place now are a great start, we believe that there could be more that could be done, as well as, kind of avoiding window dressing, that kind of thing. We want to really make real changes. And, issuing statements are a great start, but consumers at the end of the day do want to see real changes, and change isn't going to happen unless you're out of the news, violating things and, violating laws, international laws. Like, we want to help you stop getting in the news for those like negative reputational stories.
Okay. Thank you. Bob, any other questions?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. We'll now transition out of our role as board members and give you some comments or suggestions or thoughts we may have going forward. And also you may ask us any questions you may have as well. Okay. Bob, do you have any observations or comments on the presentation?
Yes, I have several. I loved your boiling down your recommendations to 3 E's. I think it's very important when you're making a series of recommendations to senior people that you leave them with something that hangs together. And I already remember the 3 E's, so that was great. I think that the idea of a chief supply chain officer is a powerful one. And the reason I was interested in the pay is I would like that person to have enormous clout. I believe the reason for the widespread commerce in products made by slave labor or people in terrible working conditions is that there's no connection between the executive suite, say, of Hugo Boss and the factory floor. And I think that the idea of a chief supply officer can really close that gap. So much for substance. On style, I have two criticisms, or I guess I should say suggestions. I think you all have shown the knowledge and the enthusiasm to tell your story. And when you read your story, it really diminishes the impact. I would much rather look at somebody who's enthusiastically telling me why these recommendations are powerful and good than have somebody reading it. And along with that, I had a real big problem with the slides. And this is exacerbated by Zoom. Zoom makes it harder. But the slides didn't support the conversation. And I had to make a decision on each slide. Do I want to look at the slide, or do I want to look at and listen to the person who's talking? Finally, about a third of the way through, I just figured that I just ought to ignore the slides, or else I would miss the whole point of the thing. Using PowerPoints is helpful, but they really need to be a lot simpler and a lot more integrated to the conversation. If you have a slide with 3 major sections on it, then when you're speaking, make it clear that you're talking about, section 1 on the slide is elevate, and here's what we want to do. The slide also next shows evaluate, and here's what I'm saying about that. I just couldn't, I found the slides to diminish the power of your presentation rather than enhance it. I thought on substance, you guys were terrific, and I admired the way you handled the questions, even the ones thrown in from left field. I think you did great.
Thanks, Bob. Congratulations. All your hard work was demonstrated in the presentation. This is not easy, as I'm sure you've experienced. From my perspective, I thought the choice of topic was good. The content was good. Your recommendations were, I thought very good, and presented, with the 3 E's, as Bob was indicating, was right on track. I just, that's very, very important. A couple of observations. One is, think about it, and as you go on your careers, if you're in consulting or working for an organization, it's important at the very beginning to make clear, why you're there and who your client is, and let them know what it is, because the board, there's a difference between presenting to an executive team versus a board versus, an elected body, whatever the case might be. So if you just say, we were engaged by you to do this review, which you answered the question, but you want to have that up front. The other point of this is some of the numbers that you came up with in the recommendations have a little bit of backup, be able to describe how you came up with those numbers. They're probably within the realm of whatever, but you want to be specific, to dictate, because when you're on a board, they have fiduciary responsibility, and the first thing they're going to go after right away is where'd you come up with that number? Why is it that number, not some other number? And if you've got the data there, it kind of puts that to the side. And the last comment is, consider having the downside, for any entity that you're talking to, whether it's a management team or a board, to let them know you've got all these great points and persuasive arguments, but there's somebody that's going to ask the question, well, okay, what's the downside here? Just be prepared, or put that in the presentation, because it addresses the problem right away. Overall, it was great. I'm very impressed with all of you, and appreciate all your hard work. Do you have any questions for us?
I guess I'm curious about the slides. I would actually like to hear more about that, and maybe Bill, you can chime in as well if you have some criticisms there, just because we definitely, went back and forth on the slide style, and that was something that took us a long time to kind of come up with, and I'm very curious, how could we have made that better, maybe is my question.
You have your choice. You can either start with your story and then construct slides to fit it. When I prepare a presentation, I just start with the slides. And then I find the words to talk around them. But I think the way to handle this is in rehearsal. One of you is speaking with the slides, and the other three of you can be watching. By the way, do you work together, or did you put this all together on Zoom?
All on Zoom.
So that's harder. But I believe that, for example, if Sophie was speaking with some of the slides, and Rachel and Paul and Pilar were watching, and then 5 minutes into the presentation, Sophie said, well, what do you think so far? I think the other three of you would have said, I can't follow you. I can't follow both you and the slide. You're probably more alert and more used to multitasking than I am. But I don't think anybody is as good at having their ears focused on one story and their eyes focused on another. I just don't think it's possible. But I think you find that by practicing. And I guess I've seen more presentations where the slides are diminish the effect than where they enhance it. I think that's a very, very common problem. And programs like PowerPoint make it very easy to make incredibly complicated slides. And you'd be better served in many cases by slides with, a small number of words on them. You just have to imagine, when I'm talking and showing this slide, can the listener grasp both things? Sometimes I do show a complicated slide. I'm preparing a presentation for next Monday. And one of the slides is a quote from somebody. And it's, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 words. And when I flash the slide, I am going to stay quiet and read the whole slide to myself to make sure that the audience has a chance to grasp what it's about. And after they have had this chance to grasp it, I will tell them why it's important or why I'm showing it or what it all means. But you can't have a slide presentation and a spoken presentation that are not really linked together. I think it would have helped if when you showed a slide, you just stop and let the person read it, or even better, stop and guide the board member through it. But as a board member in this presentation, I would have had a hard time.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I don't want to leave you with a negative impression, because I think the substance and the presentation that you made was really terrific. And I think you picked an incredibly important topic. And your research supported your conclusions. And I didn't like the slides.
No,
is
thank you for your
This is
feedback.
Thank you.
Just good commentary, good advice, because it's as you face boards, you're going to have all kinds of different folks that are going to interpret things differently. And the content was great, the substance was great. You pulled together what you needed to pull together, and it's not easy on Zoom. We've all been on this for 2 years, and it's not always easy to convey the same kinds of information. But I want to thank you all for a great job, all your work you contributed. And I wish you the very best of luck in the competition.